Welcome to Conversations, and it's my pleasure and honor to be able to interview Bruce Levingston, who is an incredibly talented, world-renowned pianist, and now has a new title to his resume. He's now author-curator of the Marie Hull collection that is now here at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Bruce, it's an honor to be able to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
You, of course, grew up in the Delta,
Yeah.
and you started playing piano at a very early age. How old were you when you actually started playing?
Well, I started when I was 4. I don't say that I could play very well, but I was just imitating my mother who played, and then she started giving me lessons, and by 5 I could play pretty well.
So she saw something in you at an early age. She saw that you had the talent, and she pushed. Because I hear this story so many times when uber talented people, they always have that parent or somebody in their life that recognizes it and gives them the encouragement.
Both my parents played instruments. My father played the piano and the clarinet, and they loved music.
Yeah.
And so there was always something going on in our house that was musical. We had the stereo going, or we had someone playing the piano, and I just grew up around it, and I loved it. And I had a little tiny record player I remember when I was 3 or 4, and I would play over and over Victor Herbert, and just thought this was great. It was like magic for me.
When you were, I was just think, when you're young and you're playing the lessons, did you ever sit there and say, you know what, someday I'm going to play at Carnegie Hall?
Well, you know, as I began to hear great pianists through my father's records, and I would see they had played at Carnegie Hall, it was something. I thought, well, gosh, I wonder what it must be to play in that great hall. And of course, I've since found out, and it's pretty great.
It's pretty great. It's awesome. Kennedy Center. I mean, you've gotten to play all around the world and play with, and also too, you've been able to collaborate with incredible writers and with, and that has got to, that's got to be the truly enjoyable part, is to create with people that are so incredibly creative.
Yes, there's a synergy, and there's a great tradition of that in the arts. There was a period, particularly at the turn of the 19th and the 20th century, where so many writers were in Paris. You had great painters there, and composers and dancers, so that Diaghilev and Matisse and Debussy and Ravel were all, Eric Satie, everyone was working together, and they all knew one another and influenced one another. And in my time in New York, there was a period when many of the great composers and painters knew one another, and I had a chance to work with some of those people, so it's great.
Probably some young men and women right now who are practicing, probably right before they watch this, thinking, what does it take to get to New York?
Well,
practice, right?
It's the old line of how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. But for me, practice is just a way of life. It's just another part of the process.
Yeah.
You know, the concert is the tip of the iceberg, but what's really great, in fact, to me, the most exciting time is when I just first open a piece of music and start exploring what's there. And that's where the adventure really is.
You talk about the turn of the century, and there was a young lady born in Summit, Mississippi, who at the time, I suppose, thought she was probably going to just grow up and do whatever it is that young women did at that time. But she turned into a true treasure of the state of Mississippi.
Indeed.
And you have done an awful lot to help bring that treasure back for a new generation to enjoy.
Thank you.
The paintings that surround us, Marie Hull, you had a quote that I thought was absolutely beautiful. It said, she saw color the way I hear music.
Yes.
And I mean, I saw that, I just like, okay, let me write that down. That's beautiful. But
well, thank you.
What got you interested in Marie Hull?
When I was a little boy, there were quite a few works of hers in the Delta. She had shown at Delta State University, and many of the painters there admired her, and also people who knew art. And so my mother and grandmother would take me to the exhibits of her work and point them out, or if we were in someone's home, they would say, this is a Marie Hull. And they knew who she was, knew her, and respected her work immensely. And this was conveyed to me, but I was also just fascinated on my own by this kind of amazing color and the way she would make her strokes. They kind of came alive on the canvas, and they seemed very lyrical and musical. And in fact, that's what she would say about her work, that it's lyrical abstraction And once she said, well, I'm a lyrical, romantical kind of painter, and she said that in an interview. And in a way, I think that is this part of her own musical background coming through. She was trained as a pianist.
Yeah, but to say that exactly, when you're saying she's lyrical and musical, I mean, she started out, her parents, she did the piano lessons, and I think at one
That's
point
right.
thought she was going to live a life as maybe a piano teacher and a church organist.
I think other people might have thought that.
Yeah.
I think she
At age
probably,
20, she knew.
She knew. And
Yeah.
even before, I'm not sure that she really thought that that was for her. I think she was always trying to break the boundaries
Yeah.
that society was placing upon her as a woman and as an artist. And so, but by 20, she was off on the road studying with great artists.
You know, I think there was a reason that she and Eudora Welty were friends and lived down the street from each other, because they both were just incredible storytellers of the times.
Absolutely. Interesting, Welty, of course, told stories through her words, but Hull told those stories through her painting.
Right.
And great kind of narrative goes through these works, and that was something else that caught my eye, because you would see through different periods her travels and her exploration, also psychological narrative as she grew as a person and grew as an artist. She started out, I think, probably quite conservative, and she said it took her a while to understand modern art, but then when she did, this explosion of color and Picasso-like shapes and thinking about space differently really affected how she expressed herself.
The thing that, you know, you talk about how she broke bounds early on, just for the roles of the women, but also the topics of her paintings. I mean,
Yes.
and one painting that I'm looking forward to seeing is The American Citizen.
Yes.
And
right,
you
yes.
have done something incredibly special, or we'll do something here in a few minutes and share that. You've brought the painting to a new level, but tell us a little bit about that painting.
So after she explored a kind of post-impressionistic painting, very beautiful, of colors like the Fauves used. She was always a great, brilliant colorist. This was something that just came naturally to her. She had a chance to go to Europe, painted all over France and Spain, and even went to Morocco. And then suddenly the Depression hit, and when she came back, things were grim and darker, and she began to look closer to home. She really had to make her living selling florals and small works that she could make some kind of sale with. But privately, particularly when people would come to her home looking for work, she might give them breakfast, or she might say, give them a little money to do something. She didn't have a lot herself, but she would ask these men who were sometimes tenant farmers or sharecroppers to sit for her. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there were people also that she knew who either worked for her or were just in her neighborhood that she came to know, some African Americans, and she painted them as well. And these paintings were extraordinary because whether she painted somebody who was white or black or whatever, she painted them all with the same dignity and sense of respect. And that comes through in all of these works. These people, she felt, were unmasked. They were real people. And so one of the figures was John Wesley Washington, who was born in 1847. And she knew him very well, painted him a number of times and drew him. And in 1936, she painted a portrait quite extraordinary. It appears to be very simple in one sense, in that it's just straight on, straightforward. And yet there's a lot going on there. He's looking right at you. And there's something very beguiling about this portrait. And she gave it the title, An American Citizen. Extraordinary for a woman born in
Mississippi
in 1890. That it struck her that this had to be the title. And in a quiet but powerful way, she's saying something with that, I think. And so it's, I think, one of her landmark works.
Tell us a little bit about the soundtrack that's going to go with it.
As I came to know this work and came to know this period of her works, I was struck even more deeply by this particular piece, and I felt that in some way I over the years have worked with other artists and composers, and again there's a tradition of composers being inspired by art and the other way around.
Right.
Whistler has nocturnes. There's a great Whistler nocturne right here in this museum, and we know Chopin wrote nocturnes. I'll play one for you, but that this piece called for something that when I look at it, I could hear the sounds of his life. And I thought it might be wonderful to have a piece of music inspired by the painting. And she loved music so much, she never stopped loving music. And so I called a great composer, Nolan Gasser. I've worked with him before. He's a tremendous pianist and great thinker about art and music. And he wrote a beautiful work that captures somehow the bittersweetness that's in that painting and that was of that time.
And you're going to play that for us today?
I play an excerpt.
Awesome. You know, you're from the Delta. You didn't grow up to become a farmer, but in a way, you've planted seeds that have grown some amazing crops. You really, truly believe in paying your blessing forward, and have done that. You've started in 2001, Premier commissions. The company started 50 works that you've helped
yes.
develop.
So the Premier Commission is a nonprofit foundation that I began 15 years ago. It was I was already being sent a lot of pieces by young composers and sometimes commissioning out of my own pocket. And I just thought this would be a way I could get an organization around it a little bit. And sometimes people would come to me and it wasn't necessarily a piece for me. They wanted something for a quartet or a symphony.
Right.
And so it was something that I felt was important. There's so many great creators out there. And as it turned out, we began to work with dancers and poets and other kinds of writers and painters, and have done many interesting things and kind of a collaborative works. And I think that's exciting and important in our society.
Well, and you've continued that. Former Chancellor Dan Jones contacted you and got you involved with the Sally McDonald Barksdale Honors College, and you're an artist in residence, which I think sounds like the perfect life. It sounds like a pretty good deal.
It's been a real honor to be a part of the Honors College and also to be part of the University of Mississippi. It's a place that's legendary for many reasons, but of course Faulkner lived in Oxford, and now the university has so many great writers and musicians and creative people. And that it's one of the most exciting communities I've ever lived in. And I still have a home in New York. I love to go back and forth. But being here in Mississippi is something, well, very fulfilling for me. I feel, I don't think until I came back I realized how much I'd missed being here. And most of them, I think it's the people. There's a shared spirit of communication and of struggle. We struggle with issues all the time, but we do talk to one another, and we're thinking about things, and it's a very exciting place to be.
Tell us a little bit about being a curator. That has to be kind of almost like drinking out of a fire hydrant at times.
So when I was putting the book together, Bright Fields, which I've
You have
named,
200. You have 200 paintings in that. I mean, 200 pieces of art in that book.
That's essentially true.
Wow.
And I was trying to find these works, and over the years I would see things in someone's home or at a museum, but particularly there were pieces that had not been seen since they left Mrs. Hall's studio.
Oh, wow.
And so I would hear from a friend, oh, there's a piece hidden away somewhere and you've got to contact this person, or my aunt has this. And so it began a kind of exercise in sleuthing, and I would cold call people. And then even after I had the works photographed for the book, then it was a matter of trying to find enough pieces to put in this show, and would people loan them.
Yeah.
And tellingly, so many people were very, very generous about loaning their works.
And it's, I think it's amazing. Just, and you've got pieces from all of her periods here.
Every
too.
period, from as early as 1912 to these, which were created in 1972.
Wow.
I'm going to give you a tour
Oh, excellent.
of this exhibition at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Right here, we're in front of Marie Hall's own self-portrait, and it's a pastel on paper, quite beautiful.
It's one of her earlier pieces
It's
too,
her-
because she's
it-
about 20 when she did that.
It's very early, and I think quite beautiful. The hopeful look in her eye,
Yes.
expectation of the future. In the 1920s, she came here. Let me show you to Florida. She loved to travel, and she loved nature and wildlife. So she saw, I think, for the first time, these flamingos, and she then also bought magazines of wildlife, so making drawings and sketches. She studied this quite a bit. It's not just taken from nature. And here we have some, if you can see here, we have beautiful works from Spain. Here she's in Cuenca, and this is one of her great oil paintings, and she had never seen architecture like this. And this also shows a kind of forward-looking thinking about painting. It's almost cubistic. It's particularly fascinating how this just fades into kind of shadow and color, and she was already playing with abstraction.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an impressionistic look about it.
That's-
It's very early too.
That's correct. Here, this is a wonderful study of Yves Serge, and it may seem at first glance a somber little painting, but it's actually quite
It's brilliant, and it's
brilliant work.
and it's so different than the styles that she was using up to then.
Yes, yes, and if you come close, you can really see the strokes.
Yeah.
Extraordinary, her brushwork. And again, almost cubism.
Almost. Yeah.
And Picasso at this time was exploring cubism and had done The Reservoir,
Yeah.
which is very similar to this, and she may well have seen it. She was very proud of this. I think this is very much a kind of impressionistic period.
I was thinking Monet when I first saw it.
Of course, or even Cassatt. It could
Yeah.
be. It's exquisite brushwork and design, and it shows the Japonois influence that was very popular in France at the period. She studied the anatomy just as she did of human figures of each different flower, and I think painted with remarkable persuasion these works. Then magnolias were very popular, and so of course she mastered the magnolia. That was her bread and butter as far as income goes. This is an extraordinary work, but if you get very close up to each individual flower, if you'll see how many different colors just in one, it's extraordinary. As been pointed out, she uses the same value for each color. So when you stand back, it doesn't appear that each one has as many colors. But this makes them come alive and become so vibrant.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
extraordinary.
it explodes. Just
It
really
explodes. That's correct. These are important pieces from the 1930s, and if you first start here, even before in 1928, she painted Annie Smith, and Annie Smith worked for the Halls. I think it's one of her finest works. just very powerful. And this is a great painting. It's Melissa. And straight on, this figure, Melissa also had worked with him. And I find this to be one of her great, beautiful early works there. And now the Sharecropper series. So some of these figures from the countryside would come in and would look for work because there was they were either losing their farms or couldn't make it go, and so she would sometimes give people a small amount of money, but say, "Would you mind sitting for me a little bit?" Yeah. And so they would sit for it. And they would be in her home, but she actually then painted this in her mind. She set them in this area, and this is a very beautiful piece. This is wonderful. This piece, what I thought was lost, it was only found just before the book was published. We managed to get it in there. This is Solomon Gross, and on the back, it's extraordinary. At the top, it says the old slave. At the bottom, she wrote, because he was born into slavery, but at the bottom, it says American. After the 30s, she began to take more chances in her painting to explore other works. And one of her students, Andrew Bucci, a quite well-known painter in his own right, went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and he came back having seen a lot of Matisse, and he actually worked on this with Mrs. Hall. Oh, wow. They painted together. This is a study, but you see how much like Matisse it appears.
Very much so.
And I think a fun piece. But she started thinking about design, and she said she'd never really studied design formally. And so this she did on her own. This is called Rhines, and I think it's one of her great, great works. Yes. And it combines something that we all have enjoyed in Mississippi a lot, which is watermelon, but with this marvelous sense of play of where the chairs are and the flattening of objects and the use of color, now bright, sharp, primary, extraordinary. This is Tangle of Lilies. This work is tour de force. It's, in a way, it could be a still life, but it could be a forest. I mean, it's a fantastic play of color and structure. And I think if you come close, again, her use of color is staggering. She said, I love any color as long as it's pink. And she did love pink, and so there you have a real example of a study. And one more sense of her love of pink is over here. Yes. This is the great Pink Lady. And the Pink Lady actually is Ida Kohlmeyer, the marvelous painter from New Orleans. And Mrs. Kohlmeyer and Mrs. Hall were great friends. And they were at an art colony together. And the model didn't show up, and there were other students there. So Mrs. Hall said, Ida, you're just going to have to model for us. And here I have a pink muumuu for you to wear, and you put this on and sit for us. And so she did. Then in '69, this is the same period, she paints the great bright fields. Yes. And every element is coming together here. Sense of the landscape, but also the sense of freedom, sense of what she was striving for in her abstract works. The strokes that you saw at the bottom of Ruins in the earlier painting from '67, she uses that here, but then manages to blend all of the blocks of color together.
When you made the quote saying that she sees color like I hear music, this is where that would come from.
I was thinking of this painting in particular, of that. This painting really sings. Everything works in it.
And why the exhibition is named after it.
And it is why the exhibition. I thought, as I thought of bright fields too, I thought obviously fields of color, but also of the land. We so much in Mississippi have all of us been influenced one way or the other by the land here, and so it seemed to be an appropriate title. And finally, in her last work, she did a triptych in 1972. Mississippi River, Mississippi Red Clay, and Mississippi Spring. It won a large award for her and prestigious prize. But the real thing is that she painted this triptych, and she was 82 at the time. Very important series. These works are landscapes, and yet they're abstracts, and they're tributes to her homeland that she loved so much. I think 3 of her very greatest works.